He walked into silence and feared the worst. The house was too quiet, no footsteps, no laughter, no sound of his boys. For a moment, billionaire David Ferguson felt the old fear tighten around his chest. That fear he'd carried for 3 years, since the day his wife died, giving birth to the very children now missing from sight. He called out their names. Nothing. Panic rose. Not again, not loss, not today. He dropped his briefcase, stormed through the echoing halls, room after room. Nothing. And then, a sound. Faint, almost distant, but rising. Laughter, joy. 3 voices. His son's. He followed it, every step quicker than the last, until he reached the living room. And there he stopped. What he saw broke him, not because it hurt, but because it healed. On all fours, apron loose around her waist, a woman he barely hired, Roslyn, crawled across the floor, his triplets clinging to her back, squealing, "Giddy up, horsey!" For the first time in years they were laughing, not surviving, living. The sun poured through the windows like a blessing, and the man who had forgotten how to feel just stood there, speechless, still. And deep in his spirit, a whisper, "This is what mercy looks like. This is what grace can restore." But before we begin, click subscribe, tap like, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story reminds you. God doesn't just show up in miracles. Sometimes he sends people. The mansion was built with glass, stone, and steel, but inside, it felt like a tomb. Tall windows reached toward heaven, but no light ever truly settled in. Every room echoed with silence, not peace, but the kind of quiet that hums with something missing. David Ferguson used to walk these halls with purpose, with laughter beside him, with love at his shoulder. But that was 3 years ago. That was before the night his world unraveled, when his wife Emily slipped away while giving birth to the very sons they had prayed for. Danny, Joey, Jesse, 3 miracles, but the price of their lives was hers. Since that day, David hadn't known how to be anything except busy. He poured himself into work, into Ferguson Capital, into deals and deadlines and dollars, anything that could numb the ache and keep his mind from wandering down that dark hallway of memory. He built wealth. He built order. But he couldn't build back the sound of his wife's voice, or the way his boys used to cry for him when they were newborns, before they stopped asking. They were almost 4 now, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, little echoes of their mother. They shared everything, a birthday, a room, even their sadness, but not their father, not really. He loved them, no doubt. But grief made him distant, and guilt made him quieter still. Nannies came and went, expensive ones, clean ones, smiling ones. But they couldn't stay. Some quit, some were fired, none were right. And all the while, the boys got quieter. They didn't ask questions at breakfast. They stopped giggling when they spilled juice. They learned how to read their father's moods, how to stay small, how to disappear. David saw it happening. He wasn't blind, but every time he thought about how to fix it, he froze. How do you rebuild a home when the heart of it is buried? That morning it happened again. Another resignation letter, another carefully folded apron on the kitchen counter, another note that said, "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore." David stood at the sink, reading it while the coffee brewed behind him. His reflection stared back from the window, tired eyes, stubble on his jaw, shirt still wrinkled from the night before. He folded the letter and slid it into the drawer with the others. Upstairs he could hear the boys waking up, little feet on hardwood, no voices, not anymore. He used to tell himself that silence meant things were under control, but lately it just sounded like absence. A new housekeeper was scheduled to arrive that afternoon. Someone from a small agency, no pedigree, no glowing resume. He almost cancelled. What was the point? They always left. He took a sip of coffee. It was cold. Across the room, a crayon drawing sat pinned to the fridge, a stick figure with 3 smaller ones all holding hands. No faces, no smiles, just a caption written in crooked toddler letters, "Me and my brothers, and Daddy." He stared at it for a long moment, and without a word David turned, grabbed his briefcase, and left for the office. The rain had started by mid-afternoon. Not a storm, just a steady silver drizzle that tapped gently on the mansion's tall windows. David wasn't home when she arrived. A silver sedan pulled up to the iron gates. No security detail was notified. No doorman waited at the steps. Just a soaked taxi driver, unloading 2 worn suitcases and a folded umbrella. Rosalind Baker stood quietly under the awning. 29 years old. No heels, no designer purse, just flat shoes, a navy blue raincoat, and a soft expression that didn't flinch in the cold. The door opened after 2 knocks. Mrs. Kelsey, the oldest staff member still holding on, gave her a cautious once-over. "You're early," she said. Rosalind smiled. Better than late. Inside, the house loomed quiet as ever. The kind of silence you didn't want to interrupt. She stepped in, careful not to track mud across the marble. The boys didn't run to greet her. They didn't peek around corners or giggle from upstairs. Instead, the first one she saw was Jesse, standing at the edge of the staircase, thumb in his mouth, dragging a blanket that was once bright yellow. His eyes locked on her. She knelt gently, arms resting on her knees. "Hi," she whispered. "I'm Rosalind." He didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. A moment later, 2 more heads peeked from behind the banister. Danny and Joey. Identical, except for the red marker stain on Joey's collar. They said nothing, just stared. Rosalind didn't move. "Your daddy told me you like pancakes," she said softly. "I'm not the best cook, but I'm really good at burning edges." That was it. The first spark. Joey blinked, then grinned, just for a second, before ducking back behind the banister. Kelsey raised an eyebrow. "That's the most any of them's responded in weeks." Rosalind just nodded. She didn't take it as a victory. Just a moment. A chance. Upstairs, she was shown to a small room off the west hall, modest compared to the rest of the mansion. She unpacked her things slowly. A stack of folded clothes, a worn Bible, a framed photo of her mother, and a handmade card from one of the kids at the daycare she'd just left behind. It read, "Miss Rosalind, thank you for listening to me." That night, David came home late, shoulders hunched beneath his coat, shoes soaked from a boardroom parking lot. He didn't ask if she'd arrived. He didn't check the kitchen or the bedrooms or the boys' rooms. He just slipped past the living room, loosened his tie, and climbed the stairs like a man carrying something too heavy to talk about. But as he reached the top step, he paused. A sound drifted from the hallway, not music, not television, humming, soft, gentle. A woman's voice carrying a lullaby down the corridor like smoke. The boys were quiet, but they were listening. David didn't move closer. He didn't speak. He just stood there for a moment, and then walked into his room and shut the door. The next morning, the mansion smelled faintly of cinnamon and syrup, and 3 little boys sat at the kitchen counter, waiting. The next morning, the kitchen felt different. Not louder, not chaotic, just alive. There was warmth in the air, the scent of cinnamon, soft footsteps on tile, the quiet clatter of a mixing bowl. David hadn't come down yet, but the triplets had, all 3 of them. Danny sat at the counter, eyes wide as Rosalind poured batter onto a sizzling skillet. Joey clutched a spoon in both hands like a microphone, humming along to whatever tune she was humming. Jesse, the quietest, had climbed onto a stool beside her, fingers sticky with flour, his head leaning just slightly against her arm. They didn't speak much, just watched her, cautious, curious. And Rosalind. She didn't perform. She didn't try too hard. She moved with ease, humming an old gospel tune under her breath, flipping pancakes as if she'd done this for them 100 times. When David finally entered the kitchen, everything paused. He didn't say a word, just stood in the doorway, suit pressed, tie half knotted, watching his sons. They didn't notice him right away. Joey was too busy trying to balance a spatula on his nose. Danny was whispering something to Jesse that made them both giggle. Rosalind glanced up, her eyes meeting David's for the first time. She straightened, unsure if she should speak. But before she could, Jessie tugged her sleeve and whispered, "Can she sit with us?" David's voice was quiet. "She has work to do." But Jessie looked up at him and said, "She is working." Rosalind didn't answer. She just turned back to the stove and finished the last pancake, setting it on a plate with 3 neat quarters, one for each boy. David left without touching his coffee, but he lingered a little longer in the doorway than usual. Later that afternoon, the rain returned, soft at first, then steadier, the kind of rain that makes the house feel smaller, the walls a little closer. Rosalind found the boys in the playroom. The floor was scattered with toys, untouched. A colouring book lay open, but no one was drawing. They sat shoulder to shoulder on the window bench, staring out at the glass, watching drops race to the bottom. "Don't you want to play?" she asked gently. No answer. She sat beside them, folding her hands. "You know," she said quietly, "when I was your age, my mama used to say rain meant God was washing away yesterday, making room for something new." Joey looked at her. "Did it work?" She smiled. "Sometimes." There was silence. Then Danny stood, walked across the rug, and picked up a toy truck. He rolled it once, then again, and placed it near Rosalind's feet. Joey followed, then Jessie. Slowly, without a word, they began to play. It wasn't loud. There were no big laughs, no shouting. Just the soft sound of toys moving across the floor, quiet voices making up rules. Jessie giggling when Rosalind pretended the truck had a voice and said, "I forgot how to drive." She joined them, not to lead, not to instruct, but to be there, present. That was the first spark. Upstairs, David stood in the hallway outside his office, holding a folder he'd already forgotten about. He heard something, not the sound of toys or voices. Laughter, not much, just a flicker, just enough to stop him. He didn't go downstairs, not yet, but he didn't walk away either. That night, as the boys slept soundly under a blanket of rain, David lay awake for a long time, wondering who this woman really was, and why the silence wasn't so heavy anymore. By the end of the week, the house had changed. Not on the surface, the walls still gleamed, the floors were still marble, but beneath it all, something had shifted. The boys were waking up earlier, hungrier, talking more. Not in sentences, not yet, but in laughter, in whispers, in questions. Rosalind didn't push them. She just made space. At breakfast, she handed out pancakes in mismatched shapes, one shaped like a dinosaur, another like a crooked heart. Joey pointed and declared, "This one looks like Daddy's tie." Rosalind smiled. David didn't. He stood by the coffee machine, mug in hand, half listening, half elsewhere. The boys giggled anyway. She let them help stir batter, flour ending up on counters, noses, sleeves. When milk spilled, she didn't raise her voice. She simply handed them a towel and said, "Good chefs clean up their messes." They nodded, proud to be trusted. That afternoon, Jessie sat in her lap while she read a picture book. His thumb rested against his chin, the way he always did when he was safe. And David? He watched it all from a distance, noticing things he hadn't seen in years. Crayon drawings taped to the fridge, a half-built fort of blankets in the hallway, little muddy socks left near the garden door, signs of life, signs of a childhood unfolding. But with every new laugh came a tug of something else, fear. What if it was all an illusion? What if she left like the others? What if they got used to her warmth, only to lose it? He'd seen it before. Helpers who smiled during interviews, played nice for a few weeks, then faded when it got hard. He couldn't let his boys open up just to be hurt again. And beneath that fear, deeper still, was something harder to name. Jealousy. They ran to her. They asked for her. They smiled with her. But when he walked into the room, they grew still again, like they didn't know how to be with him anymore. He couldn't blame them, but it cut anyway. That night, after dinner, he stopped outside the kitchen where Rosalind stood washing dishes, sleeves rolled, humming quietly under her breath. The boys were upstairs, tucked in early after a long game of hide-and-seek that she had somehow turned into a lesson on counting. David leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. She's not a teacher, he reminded himself, not a therapist, not a counselor, not a nanny with degrees on the wall. Just a young woman from Atlanta with no perfect resume. And yet here she was, humming lullabies and pulling his sons back to life. He cleared his throat. She turned, startled. "Oh, sorry, sir. I didn't hear you." David stepped in. "The boys, they seem to like you." She dried her hands slowly. "I like them." A pause. "I don't believe in fixing children," she added quietly. "I just try to see them." David said nothing. He looked at the plate in her hand, at her tired eyes, and instead of offering thanks, he said flatly, "Let's just keep it professional." Rosalind blinked once, then nodded. "Of course." That night she stood in her small room, folding the same shirt twice. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. She whispered a short prayer, the same one she always said when she wasn't sure she was welcome. "Lord, if you've put me here, help me stay." Upstairs, David sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the photo on his nightstand. Emily holding the boys as newborns, joy still fresh in her eyes. He set the frame down gently, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel in control. And that terrified him. It happened on a Wednesday. The rain had lifted, and for once the sun reached through the tall windows of the Ferguson mansion, painting long golden lines across the living room floor. David came home early. Not planned, not announced, just tired. He stepped inside and paused at the quiet. Not the usual heavy silence, but something else. A kind of stillness that made the air feel softer. He set his keys down, loosened his tie. Then he noticed them. 3 small drawings taped across the wall near the staircase, paper crooked, tape curling, each one different, scribbled stick figures with smiling faces, crayon-colored suns, a woman with a braid, 3 boys with crowns, a tall man standing off to the side. In every picture, Rosalind was at the center. He stared at them for a long moment, his jaw tight. Upstairs, a door creaked open. Footsteps followed. Joey's voice floated down. "Miss Rosalind, I finished the blue one?" Rosalind's voice answered, warm and calm. "Let's hang it with the others, baby." Baby. He flinched. They barely called him Dad anymore. He found her in the hallway a few minutes later, kneeling by the wall, helping Joey tape his newest masterpiece between the others. She looked up when she saw him, smiled. He didn't smile back. "These drawings," he said. "You put them up?" Joey looked between them, unsure. Rosalind rose slowly. "The boys wanted to. I asked first." David glanced at Joey. The little boy was suddenly quiet, folding inward. Rosalind caught it. "They just wanted the house to feel like theirs," she added gently. "It is theirs," David replied, a little too sharply. The silence after that was sharp, thin, tight. Joey quietly backed away and disappeared into the room down the hall. Rosalind didn't move. She could have apologized, stepped back, smiled and said she understood. But she didn't. Instead, she met his eyes. Calm, steady. "They miss you, you know," she said softly. David blinked. "Excuse me. The boys, they're not choosing me over you, they're just reaching for whatever warmth they can find." His jaw clenched. "You're saying I haven't been warm?" "I'm saying you've been grieving," she said. "And they've been trying to figure out what part of you is still reachable." His eyes darkened. "You don't know me." "No," she agreed. "But I know what it looks like when children stop asking for attention and start asking for permission to exist." That hit him harder than he expected. His breath caught. Just for a second, he looked away, down the hallway, where his son had disappeared. Then back at her. "You're very confident for someone who was hired to fold laundry." Her gaze didn't falter. "And you're very afraid for someone who built an empire." That silence stretched longer than the first. He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He just turned and walked away. Later that night, Rosalind sat alone at the kitchen table, folding napkins that didn't need folding. She almost packed her things. Twice. But she stayed. Not because of the job, not because of the paycheck, because of the 3 boys upstairs who had learned to laugh again. Upstairs, David stood in front of the boys' door. He could hear them whispering, one of them giggling under the covers. For a moment, he raised his hand to knock, but he didn't. Instead, he walked to his own room, closed the door quietly, and wondered why the sound of their laughter made him feel so far away. The day began like any other. Boardroom meetings, back-to-back calls, a string of numbers David couldn't quite make himself care about. He nodded at quarterly projections, signed off on contracts, smiled the way you smile when no one notices you're not really there. But something was different. He kept checking the clock, watching the time pass like he was waiting for a reason to leave. By noon, the feeling had grown. Restlessness, like something was pulling at him from far away, not urgent, just steady, like a thread tugging at a knot he'd long ignored. At 1:12 p.m., he closed his laptop mid-meeting, stood up, and walked out without explanation. No driver, no assistant, just his keys, his coat, and a quiet need to be somewhere that wasn't here. The drive home was silent, no music, no phone calls, only the sound of tires on wet pavement and the faint ache behind his ribs. When he pulled into the driveway, he didn't expect anything. Not really. The mansion stood as it always had, tall, cold, untouchable, but when he stepped through the front door, he stopped. It was quiet. Too quiet. No footsteps, no cartoons, no chatter from the kitchen, just stillness. His heart kicked once, hard. He called out, "Boys?" No answer. He dropped his keys, took a step forward. "Roslyn?" Nothing. For a flicker of a second, something ancient rose in his chest. Fear. The kind he hadn't felt since the night Emily died. He walked faster, room to room, office, kitchen, dining hall empty, each space more silent than the last. And then, a sound. Faint, unmistakable, laughter, high, wild, unfiltered. He froze, turned his head. It was coming from the far wing, the living room. He followed it, each footstep careful. His breath caught as he reached the hallway. The laughter grew louder, tumbling down the corridor like sunlight. Then he turned the corner, and what he saw unstopped him cold. There she was, Roslyn, on all fours, crawling across the rug. His sons, riding her back like cowboys, arms wrapped around her shoulders, shouting, "Giddy up, horsey!" Pillows were everywhere. The couch cushions had been turned into a fort. One of the boys had jelly on his shirt. Another had a crown made from aluminum foil. Roslyn was laughing, not politely, not carefully, fully. And the boys? Their faces were glowing, not clean, not quiet, not contained, alive. David didn't move. His briefcase slipped from his hand. No one noticed him, not at first. Not until Jessie looked up and squealed, "Daddy, come be the horse too." Roslyn's head snapped toward him. Her smile dropped. She stopped moving. The boys slid off her back, confused. Joey looked between them and whispered, "Did we do something bad?" Roslyn stood slowly, brushing crumbs from her knees. Her voice trembled. I didn't mean to. They asked. I thought." David said nothing. His heart was loud. His mind was louder. 3 years of silence, of aching, of trying and failing. And here they were, playing, laughing, living because of her, not him, not his empire, not his order. Her. In that moment, something in him cracked, not with anger, with awe. He couldn't speak, he couldn't move. He could only watch and wonder if this was what healing looked like, and if he'd already missed too much of it. For a few seconds, no one moved. The room held its breath. The triplets stood near the couch, unsure if they were in trouble. Roslyn stood by the bookshelf, hands gently clasped, as if she were waiting for a verdict. And David David stood just inside the doorway, the sound of his own heartbeat loud in his ears. He didn't know what he was feeling. It wasn't anger. It wasn't approval either. It was something deeper, something raw. He looked at his sons, shirts wrinkled, cheeks flushed, hair sticking up from play. They looked nothing like the quiet, careful boys he left every morning. They looked alive. And he didn't know whether to grieve that he'd missed it, or fall to his knees in thanks that it hadn't been lost for good. Rosalind stepped forward, slow and careful. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "They were restless, and I thought a little play might help. I didn't mean to cross a line." She stood tall, but her voice betrayed her. It was trembling, not from fear of punishment, but from dignity trying not to shatter. David looked at her. He didn't see defiance. He didn't see disrespect. He saw someone who had crawled on all fours for children who weren't hers, and smiled while doing it. He saw kindness where he'd expected control, and he realized, for the first time in a long time, that maybe love didn't always come the way he thought it should. "Daddy," Jesse's voice pulled his gaze downward. The boy held his foil crown in both hands, eyes wide. "Can you be the horse next?" Danny and Joey nodded beside him, wordless but hopeful. David's throat tightened. He looked at Rosalind. She didn't speak. She didn't plead. She just stood still, waiting for his choice. He could have walked away. He could have said, "No, that's not my place. That's not who I am anymore." But something in him cracked, and in that crack light came in. He stepped forward, slowly. His voice was rough when he spoke. "I'm not as fast as Rosalind." 3 little faces lit up. Jesse squealed. Joey jumped in place. Danny threw his arms around his father's leg. And then David, the billionaire who once measured time in contracts and profits, dropped to his knees. He let them climb onto his back, one by one, their laughter rising like a hymn. He crawled across the living room floor, tie hanging loose, palms on the carpet, while his sons shouted, "Faster, Daddy, faster!" And Rosalind? She watched from the wall, her hand covering her mouth, not to hide a smile, but to hold back tears. That night, long after the laughter had quieted and the boys had fallen asleep in a tangle of blankets and joy, David stood at the window of his study. The lights were off. He didn't need them. The house, once silent, once cold, now breathed around him. Not perfectly, not loudly, but alive. And for the first time in 3 years, David whispered into the darkness, "Thank you. Not for wealth, not for success, but for mercy. For the second chance he didn't ask for. And the stranger who delivered it." Down the hall, Rosalind sat on the edge of her bed, still in the same clothes, hair slightly undone. She held a crayon drawing in her lap, Jesse's from earlier. It showed 4 stick figures this time, 3 with crowns, one in the middle, arms outstretched, labeled simply, "Us and Daddy." The next morning, something felt different, not louder, just warmer. The boys woke early, barefoot and grinning, their hair still messy from sleep. Jesse padded into the kitchen first, dragging his blanket behind him. Joey followed with a plastic toy in one hand and a slice of toast from the nightstand in the other. Danny whispered something about more pancakes, eyes half closed. And there she was, Rosalind, already at the stove, braid tucked into her sweater, singing something soft under her breath. No tension, no fear, just morning. Like it belonged to them now. David came down 5 minutes later, not in a rush, not in a suit, just present. He paused at the doorway, unseen for a moment, watching them. The boys weren't performing. They weren't on their best behavior. They were just being, alive, loud, spilled juice and sticky fingers. And somehow it was beautiful. Rosalind looked up and saw him, and this time she didn't flinch. She just offered a gentle smile. "They've been asking for banana pancakes since sunrise." David raised an eyebrow. "I thought you said you burn the edges." She smirked. "They like them that way." He stepped in slowly. "So do I." Later that day, he called her into his office. The boys were in the backyard, jumping through puddles in rain boots, their laughter echoing through the glass. Roslyn entered carefully, wiping her hands on a dish towel, unsure why she'd been called. David stood at the window, watching his sons, mud-streaked and free. He didn't turn around when he spoke. "I've built a lot of things," he said quietly. "Companies, buildings, plans that stretch for years." She said nothing. "But I couldn't build a home," he continued. "Not without her." A beat of silence. He turned to face her. "And not without you." Roslyn's breath caught. His eyes weren't guarded this time. They were tired, yes, but open, honest. "You gave them something I couldn't," he said. "You gave them childhood." Her lips parted, but no words came. He reached for the drawer in his desk, pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper, a new contract. "I'd like you to stay," he said softly. "Not just as a housekeeper. Not just as help." He slid the paper across the desk. "As someone who belongs here." Roslyn stared at it, then at him. "This house was cold for a long time," he added, "and somehow you taught it how to breathe again." Her eyes filled. She tried to speak, but her voice broke halfway through. "You don't know what that means to me," she whispered. "I think I do," he said. A knock interrupted them. 3 fast taps on the door. "Daddy!" Joey shouted. "Come outside! We made a mud kingdom!" David smiled. "I should go," he said. Roslyn nodded. "So should I." They walked out together, into the golden afternoon, where 3 little boys danced in circles, crowns of wet leaves on their heads, their boots splashing through the puddles like kings returning home. And behind them, the mansion that once echoed with grief, now filled with something softer, not perfection, but peace. That night, David tucked them in. All 3, one by one. They didn't ask for a story. They just asked, "Miss Roslyn's staying, right?" He smiled. "She's not going anywhere." And from the hallway, she stood in the doorway, quietly watching. The home was changing, and for the first time so was he. It was a Thursday evening when the house finally felt full. Not crowded, not noisy, full. David came home just after 5, not late, not early, just on time. The gate clicked shut behind him. The driveway still gleamed from an afternoon rain. And as he stepped through the front door, a sound met him. Not silence, not the echo of emptiness. Laughter, gentle, familiar, alive. He walked toward the kitchen, no briefcase, no phone in hand, and paused at the doorway. There they were. Danny stood on a stool, stirring batter in a chipped blue bowl. Joey sat at the counter, pouring chocolate chips into a measuring cup. Too many, as usual. Jessie leaned against Roslyn's side, watching the pancakes sizzle with wide, happy eyes. Roslyn was humming, hair pulled back, apron tied around her waist. No one noticed him at first. They were too busy living. And David didn't interrupt, he just watched. The boys were barefoot, the floor was messy, the air smelled like vanilla and something slightly burnt. But for once everything was exactly as it should be. Dinner was simple. Pancakes, fruit, spilled juice, 3 stories told at once. Roslyn sat with them now, not hovering like staff, but anchored like family. Danny leaned into her. Joey made her laugh. Jessie climbed into her lap without a word. David listened more than he spoke, not because he didn't have words, but because he didn't need to prove anything anymore. For the first time in a long time, he simply belonged. Later, he tucked the boys into bed, one by one. Danny wanted to talk about dinosaurs. Joey insisted David sing a song, terribly off-key. Jessie fell asleep mid-sentence, fingers curled into his pillow. As he turned off the lamp, he heard Jessie mumble, half asleep, "Don't let Miss Roslyn go, Daddy." David smiled in the dark. "She's not going anywhere," he whispered. He stepped into the hallway, and there she was. Roslyn, leaning against the wall, arms folded, watching the door he'd just closed. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then David broke the silence. "You saved them," he said. "And you saved me, too." Rosalind's eyes filled, not with surprise, but with something gentler. "I didn't save anyone," she said quietly. "I just stayed long enough to see what love could do." He nodded slowly. "Then thank you for staying." She didn't answer, not with words, but her smile held everything. Grace, forgiveness, home. Later that night, David sat in the living room alone. No noise, no distractions, just the sound of the fireplace and the weight of stillness that no longer felt like grief. He looked around, toys in the corner, drawings on the wall, a pillow fort half collapsed on the rug, imperfection everywhere, but peace too. He reached for the photo on the side table, the one of Emily holding their newborn sons. "I hope you see them," he whispered. "I hope you see her." His voice cracked. "They're okay now." Upstairs, Rosalind sat by the boy's bedside, tracing the edge of the same crayon drawing Jessie had given her weeks ago, the one with 4 stick figures. But now, a 5th had been added, a tall figure, standing close, not on the edge, not distant. This one was labelled Daddy. The mansion still gleamed, but now it breathed, it laughed, and for the first time in a long, long time, it was home.